Hey guys, I'm Taufik. Few days ago, one of my subscribers reached out to me who had just got a job in one of the FAANG companies. He shared with me an SQL query which he was given during his interview process with that FAANG company, and he wanted to know what would my solution be for that particular SQL query. Now, I was very happy to receive that question for two main reasons. One, because it was a question that was asked by a FAANG company, a very big tech giant. And I have never given an interview for a FAANG company, so it was good to know what kind of questions can be asked in these kind of big tech companies. Secondly, the question itself was really very challenging. There are a lot of complexities that you needed to consider before writing a query to solve this question. Now, instead of keeping the question just to myself, I thought I'll just share this question with each and every one of you, and that is why I'm making this video. So in order to solve this question or to write the query, I'll be using the PostgreSQL database. But I understand most of you guys also use MySQL, Microsoft SQL Server or Oracle. So I'll also provide you the SQL query for all of these RDBMS as well. You will find the SQL query, the scripts, and also this particular question in my blog. I'll leave the link to my blog in the description below. As always, before I can start, if you like my work and if you'd like to support this channel, then please make sure to subscribe to the channel and give me a thumbs up. Thank you, and let's begin. Okay, so let's look at the question itself. Now, as you can see, there is a lot of information provided here. So let's try to read this question in detail. Let's try to understand them, and only then let's try to write the query. Okay, so the question states, we want to generate an inventory age report which would show the distribution of remaining inventory across the length of time the inventory has been sitting at the warehouse. We are trying to classify the inventory on hand across the below 4 buckets to denote the time the inventory has been lying in the warehouse. Okay, so there are 4 buckets which we need to fill with the given data. Okay, so we have 0 to 90 days, 91 to 180 days, 181 to 270 days, 271 to 365 days. Okay, so in simple words, what they are basically asking is, there is a warehouse which basically gets some shipments. The shipments can either bring some items into the warehouse, or the shipment might mean that they are taking some items out of the warehouse. So for a particular day, depending on the number of items remaining in the warehouse, they want to know how many items have been lying in the warehouse for the past 90 days. They want to know how many items have been lying in the warehouse for the past 91 to 180 days. And they want to know how many items have been lying in the warehouse for the past 181 to 270 days. And similarly for how many items have been lying in the warehouse for the past 271 to 365 days. And they have given this table here. So before I explain this table, let's also look at this. So they are telling, for example, the warehouse received 100 units yesterday and shipped 30 units today. That means there are 70 units which are 1 day old. And there's one important point they have mentioned here, saying that the warehouse uses FIFO method, that is first in first out approach, to manage the inventory. That is, the inventory, or basically the items that comes first, will be the one that will be sent out first. And now let's look at this table. So this is basically the table data that they have provided, and you can see we have 5 different columns. Now this table basically represents a warehouse where there are different shipments that can come on a particular day. Now for each shipment that arrives, there is a shipment ID. This is a unique identifier, and then the shipment can either be an outbound or an inbound. Okay, this is a type of shipment. So outbound means that the items will be taken out from the warehouse. Inbound means there will be some items or inventory that will be added into the warehouse. Okay, so these are the two types. Now, whenever there is a shipment that comes into the warehouse, whether it's an inbound or outbound, there is a column that is on hand quantity delta, which basically indicates how many items or how many inventories have been added or removed from the warehouse. So the number of items that are added or removed from the warehouse is mentioned in this column, that is on hand quantity delta. And then there is another column on hand quantity, that is the second column, which basically indicates on a particular day how many items are remaining in the warehouse. Okay, that column is named as on hand quantity. And then finally there is another column, that is the last column, event date time, which basically is the date and the time when the shipment happened. So it's not just the date, but also there is a timestamp that we need to consider. So this is basically the given data. Now what we are expected to do is, we need to write a query or basically build a report which is going to take this data and then provide an output which would look something like this. Okay, and as they told previously, they want all of this data to get segregated into these 4 buckets, and this bucket should have values indicating For a particular day, for the remaining items in the warehouse, they want to know how many items have been in the warehouse for up to 90 days, how many items in the warehouse have been in the warehouse from 91 to 180 days, how many items have been in the warehouse from 181 to 270 days, and similarly for 271 to 365 days. So we need to analyze this data and somehow come up with an output which would look like this. Okay, and they have also given you an example here saying that, for example, as of 20th May 2019, that basically is the very last record in this table, that is TR001, that is 20th May 2019. They say 250 units were inbounded into the FC. FC basically represents like a warehouse. And then on 22nd May 2019, 8 units were shipped out from the FC, that is warehouse, and reducing the inventory hand to 242. So that is what is mentioned here. That is on the first day, that is 20th May 2019, 250 units or 250 inventories were added into the warehouse. So the total items in the warehouse were 250. On 22nd May, 8 of the items were removed from the warehouse. So the total remaining count was 242. On the 31st December 2019, 120 were added into the warehouse, that because it is inbound. So the total number of items in the warehouse increased to 362, that is 242 plus 120, which becomes 362. And similarly on 29th January 2020, there was 27 items that were outbound. That means 27 items were removed from the warehouse. So the count reduced from 362 minus 27, which is equal to 335. And that is what they have explained here as an example. So let's say if the given table only had these 4 records, that is the last 4 records up to 29th Jan 2020, then on 29th Jan 2020, out of the 335 units remaining in the warehouse, 120 were present from the last 90 days and 215 were available in the warehouse from 181 to 270 days. Okay, so this is just an example that they have given how what is their expectations, and they have then explained you all the different columns which I already explained, and then they have told the data is sorted within with the latest entry at the top. So meaning that the last shipment that happened will be at the top and the first shipment that happened will be at the bottom of this table. Okay, and then finally this is the output. So this is basically our question. I'm not sure how much you got that, but on the first glance, as soon as you look at this question, you see that you have a table and you are basically asked to convert row level data into column level data. And when doing so, you need to do some aggregation, right? So this looks like a perfect example for using a pivot table. Now, that's what even I thought. And I'm sure we can do this query using pivot table as well. But I have come up with a solution without using the pivot table by just using some simple SQL queries. Okay, so I'm going to write that query. But before we write that query, it's very important to understand how did they come up with this calculation. Okay, because once we understand the calculation that they have done, then we can build a logic according to that calculation. If we don't understand the calculation that they have done, then we will not be able to build the logic. And if you have not built the logic, then we cannot basically write the query. So I'll be writing the query in a few minutes, but before I write the query, I'm going to explain you the logic and explain you how we can calculate this inventory age. So make sure you thoroughly understand this explanation. If you're not able to understand it, I recommend that you watch this video again and again until you understand it, because it's not very simple. It might be a slightly confusing thing, and I'll try my best to explain it in the simplest way possible. Okay, so in order to build this logic, first let's do one thing. We'll copy this data into an Excel file. So I have already copied it here. It's the same exact data because here I can show you more clearly what my thinking is. Okay, now in order to do the calculation, the very first thing that we need to do is we need to identify day 1. Okay, because we need to know what is the day from where we need to go prior to 90 days and then see how many items have been lying in the warehouse for the last 90 days, and same way we do for 180 and 270 and 365 days. So the first thing that we need to do is what is our day 1. Okay, and just by looking at the query here or the question statement here, it's telling the data is sorted with the latest entry at the top. That means the last shipment has been is basically our first record. So that means this basically will be my day 1. Okay, so I'm just going to mark this in bold, just saying that this is my day 1. Okay, and this record here is very important because based on this day 1 data, we are going to do all our calculations. And that is because from this day 1, that is the date 25 May 2020, we need to subtract 90 days, and that will be basically our 0 to 90 days range. And during that range, we need to somehow count the total number of inventories that have been lying during that period. Okay, so this date is very important for us, and also we need to know how many items that have been remaining. So it has been told in the question that we need to find the inventory age report, we need to build the inventory age report for the remaining inventory across the length of time. So basically only for the remaining inventory. As of the day 1, the remaining inventory is 278. Okay, this is important. When we further write the query, you will understand why it is important. So let's do one thing. First, let's see out of all of these shipments, which were the shipments that happened in the last 90 days. Okay, and how can we do that? We can simply do that by just considering the day 1 date, that is 25 May 2020, and subtracting 90 days from it. So approximately, if I subtract 90 days from May 25th, I can say that it will be around 25th February 2020, right? So just by doing a simple calculation, this is May, 90 days is around 3 months prior. So 25th May, subtract 90 days would be around 25th February. So I can just say that all of this data here, or basically all of these shipments here, have happened in the last 90 days. So I'm just going to mark this in yellow, so just that it becomes clear. And I'm just going to mark this, let's say, okay, merge. I'm just going to say this like 0 to 90 days. So what I have done is, from my day 1, I have subtracted 90 days, and then I have able to identify what are all the shipments that happened in the last 90 days, and I have marked them in yellow. So basically we need to write different queries to calculate the age of inventory between 0 to 90 days, 91 to 180 days, and so on and so forth. Okay, so there would be different queries which would calculate this value separately. Okay, and that is why in order to do this calculation, we first need to know what is the data that we need to consider. So for 0 to 90 days, this is the only record that we need to consider. Similarly, what are the shipments that happened from 91 to 180 days? How do we do that? We can just do that by subtracting this day 1 minus 180. Day 1, that is 25th May 2020, minus 180, that is around 6 months, would come around 25th November 2019, right? You can see that I have some transactions for February, January, and December, but I do not have any transactions for November. But I just need to consider the shipments that happened between 3 months and 6 months. So I can just say that these are the 4 records which were the shipments that happened between 3 to 6 months. So I'm just going to mark them in a different color here, let's say orange. Okay, and then I'm going to just mark this like 91 to 180 days. So I'm just marking what are the different shipments that happened between 91 to 180 days, and I'm just getting this calculation just by using the day 1 date and subtracting 180 days. So basically any shipments that happened after 25th November 2019, I'm considering it until the 90th day. So this is basically my day 90, right? So that's what. And I would have marked day 180 as well, but I do not have any shipment that happened in 25th November 2019, so I am not marking day 180. Okay, but basically this is what we need to understand. We have segregated this data for the shipments that happened in the first 90 days. Then we have segregated the data for the shipment that happened between 91 to 180 days. Okay. The next thing that we need to find is what are the shipments that happened between 181 to 270 days. So how do I do that is I just subtract 270 days, or basically 9 months, from 25th May 2020. So if I do that subtraction, I get around, I think, 25th August 2020. And you can see there are no transactions that happened between 25th August 2020 to 25th November 2020. So I can just mark it here saying that 181 to 270 days, no shipments. Okay, maybe just to make it more clear, I can just say it would be like. And same way, if I look for shipments that happened between 271 to 360 days, I can just subtract 365 days from my day 1, that is 25 May 2020 minus 365 would come around 25 May 2019. I can see that I have transactions for 22nd May 2019, 20th and 20th May 2019, but there is no shipments that happened after 25th May 2019, right? So these 2 shipments that are present happened prior to 25th May 2019. So this is prior to 365 days. So again, for 365 days, I can say that from 271 to 365 days, I can say that there are no shipments. Okay, and this date is generally like Now, what about these two shipments that are present here? These shipments happened prior to 365 days. So I can just mark it like prior to 365 days. Okay. And because it happened prior to 365 days, and as per our requirement, anything that happened prior to 365 days, we are not doing any calculations here. So we can just ignore these records. Okay. We'll write a query which will automatically ignore this record. So you'll come to know when I write this query. Okay. So basically I want to know how many items or inventories have been lying in the warehouse in the last 90 days. So in order to calculate that, I simply want to know how many inventories or how many items were shipped into the warehouse in the last 90 days. How do I know which were shipped into the warehouse? I can just use this event type inbound. So any shipment where the event type is inbound means that these were the shipments which were added into the warehouse. So I have this one. So I'm just going to mark this like, let's say in a different color, dark yellow. And then I have these two inbound. So in all the shipments that happened in the first 90 days or the last 90 days, there are only 3 shipments which were basically inbound. Basically means that these were the only time when items were added into the warehouse during the last 90 days. So if I add 31 plus 102 plus 43, I will get it is 176 as you can see here. Okay. So basically if I just sum all the inbound items during the last 90 days, I will get the total items that were added to the inventory in the last 90 days. That is fine. And if I go back to the output, I can see that the expected output is also 176. So looks like this, just by summing up all the inbound items during the last 90 days, I'm going to get the output that I want. But there is one tricky point that you need to consider, and that is we are not going to write the query which is only going to work with this particular data. The query or the report that we are going to generate should not only work with this data, but it should work with any type of data. So once we get the sum of all the inbound items in the last 90 days, we are going to compare it with the total items that have been remaining as of the day one. Okay. For example, let's say on 24th May, the total items in the warehouse were 377. And then on 25th May, 99 items were removed from the warehouse because it was outbound. And so 377 minus 99, it returned 278. So it means that 278 were the total items remaining as of day one. Okay. But let's imagine on this 25th May, instead of 99, let's say if they had removed or shipped out 299 items. If they had shipped out 299 items, then the total items remaining as of 25th May would have been just 78, correct? Because 299 was removed. I'm just changing the data just so that I can explain you what are the different scenarios that we need to handle. Okay. So if they removed 299 items on 25th May, then the remaining items in the warehouse as of 25th May would have been 78. And now, if I just consider the sum of these three, that is 102, 43 and 31, that is 176, then it kind of seems like out of the remaining 78 items that are present in the warehouse as of 25th May 2020, 176 items have been staying in the warehouse for the last 90 days. Which seems absolutely wrong, right? So remaining items is 78 and you're telling 176 out of the 78, 176 have been lying in the warehouse for the last 90 days. This does not seem correct. So that is why once we get the total sum of all the inbound items that have been added in the last 90 days, we need to compare this sum with the total remaining items in the warehouse as of day one. And if the total items that are remaining in the warehouse as of day one is less than the total items that were added into the warehouse during the last 90 days, then we need to basically treat that the total remaining items are the total items that have been added to the warehouse in the last 90 days. And why I can say that is because of a statement that is given in this problem statement here, saying that the warehouse uses FIFO approach, meaning that first in first out approach. So any item that is added into the warehouse will be the first item that is removed from the warehouse. So even though there were 299 items removed, it doesn't mean that the 176 items that were added into the warehouse during the last 90 days are part of this 299. Okay, because first they will remove the items that were already present. So first they will remove all the items that were prior to the 90 days. And after that only they will remove the items that were added during the first 90 days. Okay. So why I'm telling this is, if the total items remaining as of day one is less than the total number of items that were added during the first 90 days, I can just treat the total items that are available as of day one to be the total items that have been staying in the warehouse for the last 90 days. Okay, I hope you understand this logic, because this is the most important logic that you need to understand. Okay, so with this understanding, let's try to write this query. Let me just change this value to the original value, that was 278 and 99. Okay, now let's try to write the query to basically calculate this for the 0 to 90 days. Okay, so let me go back to my PostgreSQL. Okay, but before I start writing queries, first thing what we need is we need this data to be loaded into a table, right? So what I have done is I've created a table by the name warehouse. I have the structure here. It's just similar to what are the columns here and the data type here. And then I have inserted all those records. So I just copied all the values from that Word document into this file. And I've already created a table and I've already loaded the data. You'll find all of this script in my blog, so you can download it from there. Now I'm just going to query this table. So I'm just going to say select star from warehouse, and if I just run this, you can see that this table is having the same data that is present in this file here. Now we are just going to use this table to come up with our query. Okay, so the very first thing that I'm just going to do is I'm just going to sort this data based on event time. So I'm just going to say order by event date time in descending order, and this is already mentioned here. If I go to the question, it's told that the data is sorted with the latest entry at top. So the shipment that happened at the last will be at the top. That is already given, but just to be double sure and just to make sure that our database doesn't mess up the order of these records, I'm just going to make sure that I always order this based on the event time in the descending order. Okay, so this is basically the data based on which I'm going to write my logic. Now as you can see, we need to do a lot of things. So we need to calculate how long the inventory item has been lying in the warehouse, and we need to do this calculation for up to 90 days, for 90 to 180 days, and so on and so forth. So we will need to write different queries for different section of the data. So that means I need to write multiple queries, right? So what I'm just going to do is, instead of using multiple subqueries, I'm just going to use the with clause. So the first query that I'm going to be taking is this main query itself, that is from the warehouse table. I'm just going to name it like WH as, and then I'm just going to move it to the right, and I'm just going to put it inside the bracket. So this is basically my first query, and that is fine. Now the very next thing that we need to do is, as I explained in the logic here, I need to identify what is my day one. Okay, and from this day one I need to fetch what is the total remaining items in the warehouse, and then I need to identify what is the day one date. Because using this day one date, I'm going to calculate the 90th date, 180th date, 270th date, and 365th date. Okay, which I need for my further calculation. So how do I get the day one date? So I can just do that. I'm just going to create another with clause here, or basically another temp table here. I'm going to call it like, let's say days, and I'm going to use as, and here I'll write my query. So I'll say select from WH, because I'm just taking all the data that was written from this warehouse, which are sorted in the event date time order. And here I'm just going to say limit 1. Okay, limit 1 means it's just going to take the first record, because I know that from this table the very first record itself is my day 1, right? So I'm just going to take that, and let's say I'm just going to do a star here for now, and let me just show all this data. So I'll just do select star from days, and if I run this, now you can see that I'm only fetching the day 1 data from this table, okay, using this logic here. So that is fine. Now from this day 1, what I need is, I want the on hand quantity. So I'm just going to fetch that on hand quantity, and then I need the event date time, okay. What else do I need? I need what is the 90th day. Okay, so I need the 90th day so I can do the segregation of the data, and then I need the 180th day so I can do the 180th day ka segregation, etc. Okay, so let's first try to find, how do I find the 90th day? As I told you, we just need to subtract the day 1 minus 90 days, right? But since I'm using PostgreSQL, and since this column here is actually not a date column, but it's a timestamp column, I will not just subtract minus 90, but I'm just going to use a clause like interval, okay? And I'm going to mention here like 90 day. So this will basically subtract 90 day from this date or from this timestamp, okay? I'm just going to put this whole thing inside a parenthesis, and I'm going to give an alias for this, like let's say day 90, okay? And now if I just run this, Okay, so now you can see that I just fetched three columns. One is the on-hand quantity, that is the total items remaining in the warehouse as of day one, and the event date time is basically the day one date, and then day 90 basically is 90 days prior to day one. Similarly, since we have already found day 90, let me also find day 180, 270 and 360 as well. Okay, so I'm just going to copy the same thing here and I'm just going to paste it here. So for 90, for 180 I'm just going to subtract 180, for 270 I'll subtract 270, and then finally 365. I'm going to name this column also accordingly, so day 180, day 270 and day 365. Okay, so if I just run this, okay, so you can see that I have day 1, that is 25th May 2020. 90 days prior to that is 25th Feb 2020, and then 180 days prior to that is 27th November 2019, and 270th day and 365 day. Why do I need all of this? Because I need to do all my calculations between this date range, right? I hope everything is clear until now. Now let's try to count the total number of shipments that arrived during the last 90 days. Okay, and that is basically what I have highlighted in dark yellow here, which we can identify just by finding the event type is inbound at this first 90 days shipments and then summing them together. So let's try to write a query for that. So how I'm going to write a query for that is I'm just going to name it like, let's say, inventory 90 days. Okay, and I'm going to say as, and here I'm just going to write my query. So select, and I know that I need to fetch all this data from the warehouse table. And then what is it I need to fetch? So I know that I need to sum. So what I need to sum is I need to sum this one, that is on hand quantity delta, right? So I'm just going to write on hand quantity delta, and then I need to sum only when the event type is inbound. So I'm just going to put it in the where condition, saying that where event type equal to inbound. Okay, this is my first condition. I also need to add another condition, and another condition is basically the date, because I only need to fetch the records where the shipments happened between the day 1 and day 90, right? So how I can do that is I can just put another condition here saying that wh dot event date time is greater than or equal to, I need to consider this day 90, right? Because you can see I need to start from this day until this day. Okay, and this day is basically by day 90, and day 90 I have already calculated in my about table, that is days. So I need to join this WH table with days. Now there is one thing. Now this days will always fetch just one record, because I have put a limit of 1, so it's only fetching the day 1 record. So when I'm trying to join WH with days, I can just do a cross join. I'm just going to join this WH table, and I'm going to join using the cross join. I'm just going to say cross join with days. I'm going to give an alias for days as D, and here I'm going to say day dot D dot day 90. Okay, so hopefully with this, when I put this condition, we'll only consider these 7 records from this table, and from that 7 records it will only consider where the event type is inbound, and from there it will count the total on hand quantity delta, that is 31, 102 and 43. Okay, now let me try to run this query and see how the output would look. So I'm at the main query, I'm just going to give this alias that I have given here, and okay, so I'll put a star here. Let's run this. Okay, so you can see I'm getting the output as 176, which is fine, and which is basically what I wanted. Now, as I told you, this would work fine if the data is just like this. But as I told you, if let's say on the last day, if the shipment shipped out 299 items, then this logic would go wrong, right? And that is why we need to handle that logic. And how we are going to handle that logic is we need to compare the value that we have got here with the value that is the total number of remaining items in the warehouse as of day 1. Okay, and then we will need to do some checking for that. So let's try to write a query to do that. First, I'm just going to give an alias for this, and the alias that I'm just going to give is like, let's say, days old. I just want to mention it like 90 days old, because this is the value, basically the number of items that have been lying in the warehouse from the last 90 days. But I cannot give a column starting with a number. That is why I'm just saying days old 90. And now let's write a query. Now I could have written a subquery here and try to put that logic or the check, but it gets a little messy. So I'm just going to create another with clause. So again, I'm just going to use the same name, but I'm just going to add a final here. And here Okay, I need to use the as clause here, and then here I'm going to write my query. So again, I'm going to say select from, I know that I need to fetch the result from this previous query here, that is inventory 90 days. And then I need to compare the value that was returned from here. Okay, so let me just minimize this. Okay, so I just need to compare the value that was returned from here. So maybe I'll add an enter here just to separate this out. So I need to compare the value that was returned from this with clause, that is the days old 90, with the value that is the total remaining items in the warehouse as of day one. And the day one total remaining items, I can get it from the days table. So I need to join this table with the days table. Again, since days table only has one column, I'm just going to use a cross join. So I'm just saying cross join. So cross join with days. I'm going to give an alias for that as D. And since I'm using a cross join, I don't need to specify any columns to join, because every record from this table will get joined with every record from this table. And since days has only one record, it kind of does not create any Cartesian product. And now I need to compare these values. So I'm just going to use a case statement saying that case when, and I'm just going to copy this column name. And as I told you, whatever value that we have got by summing up these three values, okay, if these three values is greater than the total items remaining as of day one, okay, so I'm just going to say if days old 90 is greater than D dot, that is a total remaining item, that is on hand quantity. If it is greater than this, then I need to consider the smaller value. That is, the smaller value will be the total items that have been lying in the warehouse in the last 90 days. So I'm just going to treat this. And else, if it is not greater, then I can just treat whatever value I got in my above query as the correct number of items that have been lying in the warehouse in the last 90 days. So I'm just going to take that value itself. And after that, I need to end the case statement and I need to give a value for this case statement. I'm just going to give it like the same column name, that is days old 90. Okay, I think this query should work. And now I'm just going to replace this with in the final table. And now if I run this, okay, you can see that the output that I'm getting still is 176, because for the current data, it still works exactly fine. What I mean to say is this query would work not just for this particular data, but even if you had any other type of data, we have written the logic to handle that. Okay, so this is basically how, using these two subqueries which I have placed inside the with clause, I have been able to identify how many items have been lying in the warehouse in the last 90 days. Okay, so I hope this was clear. Now let me just change this final column name here. So the column that we are getting is this one, right? But the column that we want to display as per our output is something like this, that is 0 to 90 days old. So I'm just going to use the same column name. So I'm going to say 0 to 90 days old. So it will be exactly what our output needs to be. And I'm just going to run it. So I just change the column name here. So this is fine. Now we have identified, basically, we have solved one part of this query. Now we need to calculate the age of the inventory for all the other days, that is from 3 to 6 months, 6 to 9 months, and 9 to 12 months. Okay, so let's try to write the query. First, let's try to write the query for 91 to 180 days. And how we can do that is, I can almost follow the same logic. So I'm just going to copy the same thing for the inventory 90 days, whatever we have written. We'll try to follow the same thing for the inventories that have been lying in the warehouse for 91 to 180 days. So I'm just going to paste it here. But here, instead of inventory 90 days, I'm just going to mention like 180 days. And again, what I need to do is, between this record, that is the 4 records here, I need to count or basically sum together all the shipments that were inbound. So in this case, there is only one record, but there can be more records as well. So I'm just going to do a sum of that, and I'm going to name it like, let's say, 180. Okay, so for the 180 days old, this were the total number of inbounds that have been shipped. Okay, and I'm putting this event type equal to inbound, and then the final check that I need to do is I need to fetch only these records. So the shipments that happened after 90 days but before 180 days. How can I do that is just by doing a between clause. I can just use a between statement here, saying that between and d dot day of 90. Okay, so I hope this is clear. Now let's try to run this query. And okay, again, since this query here, or basically this table here that I have created, is only to fetch the first column, that is the inventories that have been lying in the first 90 days, and this query that I have written is to calculate the inventories that have been lying from 91 to 180 days. I need to join this table with the above table. So, and since I know that all of these queries will only fetch one record because I'm just doing a sum, it will only return one record, I can just do a cross join. Okay, and I'll just do cross join with this, and here I'm going to fetch the second column, and that's going to be my days old 180. Okay, and I'm going to name it like, let's say the same thing, that is 91 to 180 days old. Okay, and now let me just run this. Let's see if it works. Okay, so I think I'm getting some output. This data is not correct, and the data is not correct because we have just written the first part of our query. As you saw, we written the first part of the query where we summed all the inbounds together during that date range, and then we needed to compare it with the total remaining items in the inventory. So we have not done this part for our 180 days, so we'll try to do that. Hopefully after that the output would be correct. So what I'm just going to do is, again we are going to use the same logic. So I'm just going to copy this same thing here. I'm going to put a comma here, and I'm just going to paste it here. I'm going to rename this table name to, let's say, 180 days final, and then here inside I will need to query from the inventory 180 days. Again I'm going to do a cross join with days, and change that I need to do here is, okay, first of all I need to consider this to be this column, that is days old 180, right? Here the calculation for this 180 days is going to be slightly different from the calculation that we did for the 90 days, and that is, here during this date range we first need to find how many shipments have been inbound during this date range, and we'll get that value, and then we need to compare this value with the total number of remaining items in the warehouse as of day 1 minus the total items that have been lying in the warehouse in the first 90 days. So we basically should not be comparing the value that we get from here with this value. We should compare the value that we got from here with the value that is present here minus the value that we got from the 90 days. Okay, because any shipments or any items that have been lying in the warehouse for the last 90 days should not be considered as present in the warehouse during the 180 days, right? So we should not be considering the value that we got in this 90 days query. So what we need to do is, I need to check if the value that I got in the 180 days is greater than the total remaining items as of day 1 minus the value that we got in the 90th day. The 90th day value that we got was basically here, that is days old 90, and I can just put it here. But this days old 90 is present in a table, that is this one, that is in inventory 90 days final. So here I'll be joining that table. So again I'm just going to do cross join of that, and from this table I have this column days old 90. Okay, so this is the comparison that I'm doing. So I'm comparing the value, that is basically the total number of shipments, that is the inbound shipment that happened during 91 to 180 days. If that is greater than the total remaining items as of day 1 minus the total items that were available in the warehouse for the first 90 days, then if this value is greater than that, then I need to treat this value, that is the total remaining items minus the items that have been lying in the warehouse for the 90 days as my final output. Okay, and if not, I can treat the 180 days as it is. Okay, and I'm going to rename this column also as this. Okay, so I hope this was clear, and now let me try to print or basically fetch the values from this. So I'm just going to replace this with this, and I think that's all. So now let me run this, and now you can see that I'm getting the output correctly. So for the first 90 days I see that there are 176 inventories that have been lying from the first 90 days, and for the 91 to 180 days there are 102 inventories that have been lying in the warehouse between 91 to 180 days. Okay, and now we need to do the same thing for the inventories that have been lying in the warehouse from 181 to 270 days. So again, what I'll just do is, I'm just going to copy this main query here. So this is the first part of the query, and I'm just going to put a comma here, and I'm just going to paste it here, and I'll replace this 180 with 270, and okay, so this column name also I'll make it like 270, and what I need to do here is, everything is same, only thing is I need to consider different dates, right? And my date range would be different, that is I need to consider the date from 180 until 270. right? That is the only difference. So here I'm checking for all the shipments that happened between 180 to 270th day. Between these dates, any shipment that happened, I'm counting the total number of inbounds by using the sum of this. Okay, and then whatever value I get, okay, let me try to first print this. Again, to print this, I need to do a cross join. So I'm just going to say cross join of this, and here I'm just going to print this, and here I'll just replace it with 270, and here I'll say this is 181 to 270, and if I run this, okay, I'm getting some error. Okay, I think there's a comma here I need to remove, and if I run this, I'm getting that because there were no shipments that happened between 181 to 270 days, I'm getting a null. But what output we want is, if it is null, it should print as 0. So how we can do that is, I'm just going to use a callis function here. So I'm just going to say callis of this whole thing. If it is null, I want it to return as 0. And now if I run this, now it's returning 0. This is fine. So what I'm also going to do is, I'm going to use this callis function also in my above queries. So if for any other data, if the data there was no shipment between 180 days or 90 days, still this should fetch 0 instead of null. Okay, so I'm just going to put the 0 callis here, and I'm going to put the callis here as well. Okay, so I'll just put this, and I'll put 0, and now let me run this. Okay, so the output is still the same. Okay, so that is fine. So we have returned the query for the 270 days. Now we need to also do this additional check, right? We cannot just sum all the inbound shipments. We also need to check this whatever value that we have got here with the total number of remaining items, and subtract it with the total number of items which were lying in the warehouse for 90 days and also for 180 days. Okay, so almost a similar query that we have written for 180. So I'm just going to copy this whole thing, and I'm just going to paste it here. So I'll just put a comma here, and I'll paste it here, and I'm going to replace this 180 with 270. And here again I need to compare my 270th column. So when I'm doing this comparison, previously for 180 I was only comparing with total number of items remaining as of day 1 with the items that have been lying in the warehouse for 90 days. But for 270 I also need to consider the 180th day output, right? So what I'll do is minus of this plus I need to consider the day 180th. Okay, that is this one. So the logic and thinking is exactly the same that I explained during this 180th query. Just that for 270 we need to consider the number of items remaining as of day 1, and also the number of items that have been lying in the warehouse for 90 days, and also the items that have been lying in the warehouse between 91 to 180 days. Okay, all this together. So again I'm just going to compare this whole thing with this, and if the 270th day value is greater than this, then I'm just going to print this whole value as my final output. Okay, and here I'll replace this 180 with 270, and I think, yeah, even this table should be 270, and I think everything else. Okay, so because I'm also using this days old 180, I need to cross join with the 180th table also. So I'm just going to copy this and paste it here, and I'm putting 180. Why I'm using this table? Because this column, that is days old 180, is coming from this table which I have basically calculated here, that is this table, right? Okay, so I think 270 days calculation is also done. So let me just put it here and let me run this. Okay, so I'm getting the correct output. So that is fine. Now finally let's do the same thing for the 365 days calculation. So I'm just going to use the same query. So I'm just going to paste it here, and instead of 270 I'm just going to replace it with 365, and then here everything is the same. So I'll just change this value to 365, that is the column name, and then for all the shipment that happened between 271 to 365 days, I'm basically doing a sum of all the on hand quantity delta where the shipment type is inbound, and then I need to change this date, right? I need to consider from 365 to 270, right? So that is what I have considered, and let me now just try to print this again. I'll do a cross join with this, and then here my last column would be, that is 365. So I'm just going to print that 365, and then here I'm just going to say 271 up to 365, right? So if I execute this, okay, so I'm getting the output that I wanted, but then again this is just I'm summing up all the inbound shipments. I also need to compare it with the total number of items remaining as of day 1 and subtracting it with the 90th day value, 180th day value and 270th day value, right? So I'm again going to copy this final query here, and I'm just going to put a comma here and paste it here. Okay, and I'm going to replace all of this 270 with 365, and okay, so this also will be 365, and then here this will be 365 as well, and I'm just going to replace this and this as well. And here when I'm comparing the value that I've got from the shipment that happened between 271 to 365 days with the total items as of day 1, as well as the subtracting it with the total items in the warehouse as of day 90, day 180, and also I need to now consider day 270, right? So I'm just going to say day 270, and I'm going to use the same thing here as well. Okay, so day 270. So I think this should work. And yeah, so because I'm using day 270, I also need to use the table from where I'm fetching that column, and that is the 270 column. So I'm just going to say 270. Okay, so I think this query should work. So I'm just going to replace this 365 days with 365 days final, and I'll run this. Okay, so I think this basically is our entire query, and we have completed this query. Now, if you see that this query would be pretty long and it might seem pretty confusing, but almost all the logic is repeated across different days. Once you identify the logic to identify the total number of inventories lying in the warehouse from 0 to 90 days, we can then apply the same logic for all the other date frames, right? So I hope you understood this query. So this query is written in PostgreSQL, but the equivalent query in MySQL, Microsoft SQL Server and Oracle is also available in my blog. So you can go to my blog and download it. So thank you guys for watching. I hope this video was beneficial. If you like this video, please leave your feedback in the comments below. Thank you and see you soon in the next one. Bye.